At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Dominiece, thank you for being on the show.
Hi, Dr. Doug. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited. This is going to be an interesting topic. And I know you focus on some very specific things, but what I'd love for you to do is share with the audience your journey that brought you to this point in time where you've written a book and where you're doing what you're doing.
So my journey really starts with my childhood. I was born to a teen mom, and I've never met my biological father. And so I was born into a very traumatic situation. I had a very traumatic conception story. And for so long, I had a lot of shame and a lot of guilt around, being a teen mom, never knowing my dad, so much so that I hid it for a long time. People very close to me, friends and some family knew, but, close friends, things of that nature. They didn't really fully know my story up until just a few years ago. It was something that I never really talked about, just because of the amount of shame and guilt that I held. And growing up, honestly, my mom and I didn't talk about it much either. It was the big elephant in the room that I think, we both just had a really hard time having conversation about. I didn't learn until my 30th, the year that I turned 30, when I really sat her down and demanded some answers, that she had still had a lot of her own unresolved trauma from the situation. And that was mostly why she never talked about it. And so it was just in the last 5 or 6 years that I started doing the work to really uncover and understand how I got here, why I had held so much guilt and shame and unworthiness about not having my dad and being born to a teen mom, and being able to heal and work through that. I think I just got to a point in my life where for so long I had been numb. I had existed that way. I had swallowed a lot of emotions in the midst of trying to block out some things. And so, I numbed the good and the bad in the midst of trying to just forget certain things. And so for a long time, I was just on autopilot and existing, and just really existing, not feeling happy, not feeling joyful, not really feeling like I was fulfilled or had purpose. And I got tired of living that way. I got tired of the autopilot. I got tired of waking up every day and going to work and feeling unfulfilled and just kind of feeling like I was just blowing in the wind. And so I started doing the work that a lot of times we don't want to do because it's hard. You got to go back and, find answers and deal with things that you closed the box on for decades. And so it's just in the last 7 years that I've been really committed to my own healing journey. And I found that the more that I did my own work, the more that I wanted to help other people, and that I was being guided to help other people. I never saw myself being in the wellness industry. Sometimes I laugh when people ask me, well, what did you major in college? I was a fashion merchandising major. And so I've completely veered off from where I originally started and what I thought my life would be. And so I'm here today. I started an organization called Move and Still, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. Move and Still provides, stress management and wellness services. And everything that I do is really all about connection, community, and change, and helping people guiding people to do their own healing work. And I've just found my way here today because of my own story, and just having the courage to begin to go back and to release the things that were holding me back. So that's a bit about me and who I am and how I got here.
Great. Hey, thank you. That's a great story. What comes to my mind, and it's really a question, and I don't know if you've really looked at this, but I suspect you have. What is it about us as children that we create a perception for ourselves that brings about that guilt, that shame, when we had nothing to do with what's going on? Have you looked at that to see why on earth you developed that guilt and shame?
I haven't done a ton of research about why, but I will say that I'm a parent and I'm raising a 4 and 7-year-old. So I can shed some light just based on what I'm observing as a parent. I think as children, I've had to do a lot of forgiving of my own mom, because I think I held such a unrealistic expectation of who my mom should have been to me. And then I realized once I became a mother that, wow, I was holding her to a standard that was really hard, and she's not perfect. She is human. She had me at 16. She was doing her best. But to answer your question, I have two girls, 4 and 7, and I see now the way that I can say something or I can do something and it can be completely misinterpreted. And so I think as children, like our brains aren't fully developed into 25. And so we're trying to do our best to process and understand the world. Someone can say something to a child and it can be completely misinterpreted. And so I think for me as a child, I just kind of was trying to make sense of what my life was. And as a result of that, and not having conversations and not having a lot of answers, I just bottled that down and it became a lot of guilt and shame. But I think that was just the way that I was able to interpret the situation. I think had my mom been more open to having conversation, it might have helped with some of the feelings that I was feeling. And so for me as a parent now, I really try to, in the midst of recently like separating and divorcing from my partner and like that being a major life change, I try to have conversations with my children, because otherwise what happens is that kids try to make sense of the world on their own. And oftentimes it's not reality, but it's the way that their little brains interpret and try to make sense of things.
Well, and as you have conversations, do you find that oftentimes you pick up on the fact that they have created a different perception of what you actually intended to be or to say?
Oh, yes.
and you're able, how do you overcome that? How do you help them to change that perception when you
Yeah.
recognize that they've developed that?
So I have found that really just explaining it, which can be hard, right? You're trying to explain life and adult concepts to children. I have a 4 and a 7-year-old, and sometimes when they say things, it's like, wow, that's really not how things are, but that's how you perceive it. Just to give you an example, when my ex-husband and I separated and we were going through the divorce process, it was, of course, like a major life transition for all of us, our family, co-parenting and splitting that way. My youngest daughter, who I think at the time we were having this conversation, she was about 3, so she was a little bit younger. She's almost 5 now. But I remember her saying that you don't love me anymore because you don't love daddy anymore. And so I had to explain, well, I'm always going to love you. And it's not that I don't love daddy anymore. Mommy and daddy have just decided that we aren't going to be together, but I will always love dad. You know, he's your dad. We were together for a long time. So I had to explain to her that just because two people aren't together, that doesn't mean that I don't love that person anymore. And it also doesn't change the love I have for you. The last thing I'll add here is that I've noticed that my children, oftentimes there's this like limited understanding of what love is. And they think, well, if you love my sister, then you can't love me. And it's just like, that's not the way life works. And so for me, it's been a lot of just trying to explain things to them in a way that is easy for them to understand with their, you know, very limited minds right now. But children are also very resilient and are able to figure things out. And so I think conversation just in general is really helpful for not internalizing some of the emotions that you often see that as adults we're trying to, you know, unlearn and release.
And parents, I hope you're listening to this, because that's some of the best sage advice that I think any parent can have, is that communication and that conversation that they can have with their kids. So you mentioned move and still. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so the name is literally, I would say, the premise of the business, right? Movement and stillness. And so Move and Still, I started in 2022. It was shortly after stepping away from online coaching. So I started coaching in the middle, like in the height of COVID. I had gone through a 90-day process of focusing every day on my mind, my body, and my spirit. I started that in March of 2022. And after that 90-day period, the idea for that 90-day challenge came to me during a meditation. And it was at a point where I was unemployed, not as a result directly of COVID, but I had walked away from my job thinking that I was just going to take a slightly longer maternity leave after having my daughter in September. And then COVID happened in March. And so it wasn't a great time to be entering the workforce. And so I found myself unemployed, not really having a plan. I was having difficulties in my marriage. And to say like my life was feeling like it was in shambles is a bit of an understatement. So I just did the only thing that I knew how to do at that time. And oftentimes today, it's the only thing I know how to do. I got still. I couldn't figure it out. You know, I'm an overthinker, and I had tried to figure it out on my own and nothing was working. There weren't any answers coming to me. So I got still. And in the midst of that stillness, I heard this whisper say, focus every day for the next 90 days on your mind, your body, and your spirit. And I did that. And at the end of that 90 days, Dr. Doug, I was a completely different person. Physically, I'd lost maybe about 15 pounds or so, but the biggest transformation was how I felt spiritually and emotionally. I felt like I was alive and awake for the first time. And for me, it was like, wow, I had no idea that I was existing in this kind of state of numbness. And even at that point, I had already been doing personal development work and growth work, but this was like a new heightened level of awareness and awakening. And so I started coaching shortly after that time because I wanted everyone to feel what I had been feeling. I quickly burned out in the coaching industry. I quickly also was realizing that clients were coming to me for health and wellness and nutrition, women, very educated women, very, successful women, but they were all very stressed out. Again, this was the middle of COVID. They were balancing full-time roles with school and families and all of these things. And it no longer was about a meal plan or, what you needed to eat or how you needed to work out. It was looking at their stress levels and really trying to understand their bodies better and understanding that when we are stressed, right, we hold on to weight and our bodies do all these things that are counterproductive oftentimes to some of our health and wellness goals. And so the more that I learned, it was kind of like a rabbit hole. The more that I learned about stress and trauma, burnout, the more that I realized that I wanted to pivot in my work and really begin to teach and educate people about stress management and emotional regulation and nervous system regulation. And so that's really where the inspiration for Move and Still came from. And so I pivoted away from just working with women and coaching. And now I work more so with organizations, offering group wellness sessions and offering wellness education around stress management and the nervous system. Because a lot of the things that we're seeing in our communities, whether you look at health or violence and crime and just, the challenges that we're facing, at the root of so many of those things is really unresolved stress and trauma that's just manifesting in all of these different ways.
Well, and that is so true. And what we're seeing now today, as you say, is just amazing. And I'm not sure any of us really understand what's going on other than to say, as you say, there's such a link between that stress, between that subconscious stuff that creates this. So you talk about a soul care trilogy to really find harmony in your life. And obviously we're now talking to companies today, we're talking to individuals. What is that soul care trilogy? And could you explain what that is?
Absolutely. So I alluded to this when I talked about that 90-day challenge that I did back in 2020. Again, that whisper came to me during meditation and told me to focus on all three of these aspects. I didn't mention to you that in addition to just, living most of my life and just kind of existing, that for about 25 years, I struggled with my weight. And so I started, if you look at pictures of me as a child, from 1 to 7, I was a healthy weight. And then 8 years old, there was a drastic change in my weight. And I gained a lot of weight in what was seemingly like an overnight weight gain process. And I struggled with being overweight as a child, well into my teenage and young adult years, and also into adulthood. For most of my life, I think I went on my first diet in middle school. For most of my life, my weight plateaued up and down. So I would, do some sort of binge diet or some sort of whatever the most recent diet trend was at that time. I'd try that thing, I might lose a few pounds, but I would always gain the weight back. And for anyone listening who has ever struggled with weight loss or just any other, sort of way to cope, when you feel like you can't get a hold of something, it leaves you feeling really like helpless. And that's how I felt. It was just like, if I could figure this thing out, like I can do anything, because for so long it was the thing that I couldn't figure out. And that what I realized in that 90-day process was that every time in the past when I had approached my weight loss journey, I was just focusing on the body. So when you think about the mind, the body, and the soul or the spirit, right? I was just focusing on the body. I was neglecting my mind. I was neglecting my spirit. And I would lose weight, but it would always come back. It wasn't until I really started focusing on my whole self. So all the parts of us, we're not just, this meat sack. There's other aspects of us. It wasn't until I started focusing on all of those aspects of myself that I was able to heal, to begin to release the things energetically that I was hanging on to that were impacting me physically. And I realized that so many of us, we are approaching life a bit narrow-minded. So maybe we're just focused on the body, or maybe we're just focused on the mind, but not the body, and we neglect our bodies. Magic happens when you really focus on nurturing or nourishing all three of those parts of yourself. And so just to give you an example of what that looks like, right? Like, what does that mean in practicality? Focusing on the body is whatever, moving your body, taking care of your body, being mindful of the things that you eat. It's doing things that make your body feel good because your body is the vessel to your soul, your spiritual being. And so the goal is to optimize that body so that it does the best that it can while you have this human experience. Most of us, right? We get the body piece. You can touch the body. That's the easy piece. But we also have a mind, and there's mental health. There's our emotional health. What are we doing for our minds? I'm curious as to folks listening to this, like, when was the last time you did something to nourish your mind? And so when I think about nourishing the mind, it's listening to things that make you feel good, being mindful about what you're taking in, right? Social media, what type of content you're taking in, who's around you and what they're saying and how that's influencing you. So listening to podcasts, listening to motivational, videos on YouTube, like whatever feels good for you, maybe reading a book, that's nourishment for the mind. And then the last part of that is the soul or the spirit. They're different, but you can interchange them. And that becomes a question of what are you doing to nourish the soul? And so that's meditation, that's prayer, that's maybe getting out in nature and really connecting with the essence of who you are. And again, we do really good with categorizing those things, but there aren't a ton of folks who really focus on all three. And so I'm trying to spread awareness and knowledge about the life-changing effects of really focusing on all the parts of ourselves. And that's what I call the soul care trilogy. Trilogy.
Oh, that's right. And you really focus on the somatic aspects
Yes.
of helping people to really heal. Can you explain to the audience what somatic means?
Yes. So somatic is a Greek word for body. So somatic practices are literally just body-centered practices or body-centered approaches to healing. And when I talked about being a coach and starting to understand stress and burnout, I started learning that our bodies actually hold our stress and trauma. We oftentimes approach our problems or our issues or our past with the mind. So we'll go to talk therapy or cognitive therapy, and we'll talk to our therapist verbally, and we'll express all of the things that happen. And that's helpful for processing and making sense of those things, but that doesn't do anything for releasing those feelings, emotions, those energetic holds, I would say, that our bodies hold. So there's this really wonderful book, you've probably heard of it, The Body Keeps the Score. I like to say the body holds the truth. So we can move on from something and, forget about it. It could have happened 20 years ago and we're not really thinking about it, but we're still holding the memories of those experiences in our bodies. And so a part of my work as the founder of Move and Still is really talking to people about how much our bodies hold and how when we go and we don't address those things, there's unresolved stress and unresolved trauma that starts to manifest in other ways. And so you might have an illness that you can't figure out. I've gone to a ton of doctors and no one can figure out what's going on. That could be unresolved stress and trauma, or maybe you're acting out in another way or coping in a way that isn't healthy and you can't understand what's going on there. And it's your body responding to this experience or these experiences that happen to you that you haven't worked through. And so while I think that talk therapy is extremely beneficial, I've gone through therapy for many years in the past. I also think it's important for people to know that it's a both and. It's doing the therapeutic work, the cognitive work, but also moving the body, releasing the body, and just holding space for the body to do what it needs to do. Our bodies are really smart and naturally they're able to heal themselves from many, many things, but it's about giving yourself the space, like slowing down long enough for that process to happen. And the reality is that many of us are moving too fast and we don't often hold space just for pauses or stillness, right, for that process to happen. And so that's really what we talk about when we talk about somatic practices.
And what are some of those practices that you have found are effective? It's one thing to go through life and not be aware. You're talking about the fact that at some point in time, hopefully, we all realize, this is not what I want, whether it has to do with weight, health, experiences, whatever that is. But what are the somatic approaches that you take that you have seen effective in helping people to start, once they're aware and willing to do the work, to start to release those? It's not that they ever go away, but it's one thing to hold on to it, and it's another thing to release it. And what approaches do you use and suggest?
Yeah, so one of my favorite, that is something that I use very frequently in my life, is breath work as a practice, or deep breathing as a practice. Breath work is an ancient practice that has gained more popularity here in the US over the last maybe 5 or 10 years, but it's an ancient practice that dates back thousands of years to, Eastern cultures. And breathwork heals you on a cellular level. When we breathe, when we allow ourselves to breathe in that way, we're able to get so many benefits. We're able to regulate our nervous system. So oftentimes, again, we're operating in a heightened stress response state, and that's how we're existing. And that causes so many issues for us. When you take deep breaths, you trigger the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that is our rest and restore, or rest and digest, part of the body. And so breath work does that. When you exhale out and you focus on a very long, slow exhale, the exhale is actually what triggers the parasympathetic nervous system. So breath work is one of my personal favorites. It's something that I use oftentimes in my work. These days, I like to combine it with sound healing. You can see I have a bowl behind me here. There's a really beautiful, I would say, like process that happens with breath and sound together that I've found. Physical movement of any kind is also somatic, or would fall under somatic practices. And so I usually like to tell people to find what works for you. I love working out at the gym, but that's not everyone's preference, or, that's not everyone's jam, as I say. And so if you're someone who likes to dance, maybe take a Zumba class, or go for a walk, or go for a jog, or go swimming. Any sort of physical movement that gets the body moving is actually helpful and beneficial, because when we move, we release those endorphins, those feel good hormones, but our bodies are also able to relax and begin to release a lot of the stress and trauma that we're holding on to. Again, like under the umbrella of physical movement, there's a ton of movement practices that would fall under that. And then, of course, meditation kind of falls under both. It almost falls under like the category of nourishment for the mind, but it can also be really beneficial to calming the body as well, because the mind and body are connected. And so when we meditate, there is oftentimes a shift in our bodies, because we're calming the mind down, which calms the body down. So that one, it falls for me under the umbrella of a somatic practice, although it, like I said, has benefit for the mind as well.
Well, and as you talk about breath work, and I hear so many people talking about breath work,
Mhm.
okay? And particularly those that are Buddhist. I happen to go back and forth from Thailand. And so,
Mhm.
you see the monks doing the breath work. What is the breath work that you have found to be effective? And is that part of meditation, or is that separate from meditation?
Yeah, so I view the two as separate, though I think they go well together. Breath work is literally deep breathing. Now, I know that there are folks out there who, and I'm a breathwork practitioner, but I don't like follow all the popular folks in the breathwork industry, so I couldn't name most of them. But I know there's like holotropic, like there's all of these special types of breathwork, or these ways that you can breathe. Whenever I teach breath work, I start with just the most simple practice. And so one of my favorites is just what I call or what you can call the straw breath. And that's taking a big breath into the belly, filling the diaphragm, filling the lungs, filling the chest, and then slowly breathing out as if you're releasing from a straw, like a very thin straw. And again, the focus is on the exhale being very long and exaggerated, because that is what's triggering the parasympathetic nervous system and helping you to relax and restore. So I don't think that there's a particular type that you have to do. There's a ton of breathwork patterns that I could, talk to you about. I kind of dive around depending on the client and what their needs are. Some patterns are going to be more activating for the nervous system, so they'll heat things up, whereas some are going to be more grounding and relaxing. I think for people, the biggest thing though is that because so many folks are living in a stress response space, or a sympathetic state of sympathetic dominant state, focus less on like, is there a particular type of breath work practice that I need to be doing, and just focus on taking very deep intentional breaths. Because when we're stressed, we're breathing very shallow, we're breathing from the chest, and that just has so many harmful benefits to our body, like not taking in the proper amount of oxygen. And so I'd say start with something very basic, like a straw breath or a box breath. That's breathing in for 4, holding the breath for 4, exhaling for 4, and then holding the breath again. Start with something simple, and then kind of build and work from there.
Well, and it's interesting. I have an older friend that is suffering from loss of memory and that type of
Mhm.
thing. And he just told me the other day, and I had no idea this was true. He told me the other day that breath work for
Mhm.
him, when he does breath work every day, multiple times, that literally subsides that
Mhm.
loss of memory for him, which I
Wow.
find just
Wow.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes along with what you're saying. So you use a word called clear,
Uh,
Clear, and I know it
uh.
stands for something. Do you mind explaining what that is?
Yes. So, a couple of months ago, I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you're getting a download, but you're getting that download over, like, it's not coming all at once. It was coming to me in small bits and pieces, and I was taking notes. And as I get something else, I would, add to it. And by the end of it, I had come up with a clear goals framework. So, of course, like I'm someone who's a very like type A, I would say like logistical person. I lean very much so on like things that can help me be organized and structured. And so I love goal setting. I love, the 12-week year process, like anything where I can check in. I'm someone who avidly time blocks on a weekly basis. And so my brain functions that way. So I had been familiar with SMART goals. I've dabbled and used them in the past. Something that I would come back to. It's not something I've been using religiously, but this clear goals framework is a similar, I would say, like process to SMART goals, but it goes a little bit deeper. So clear is an acronym. The C stands for cause. And so that's, when you think about goal setting, oftentimes we set goals, but they're very shallow goals. And oftentimes it can be hard to achieve and accomplish those goals because we haven't done enough putting the concrete, like, I would say, structure in place for that goal to be successful. And so when you have a shallow goal or a fuzzy target, you're oftentimes going to miss. So the C is starting with your cause. And what that means is start with your why. Like, why is this goal important to you? Why are you doing this? How is it going to impact you once you complete this goal? Getting clear on the why increases your chances of, achieving this goal. The L is level up. And what that means is this a goal that challenges you? Is this a goal that really stretches you when you think about goal setting? Sometimes we can set goals and they're easy to obtain. You want to set a goal that's obtainable, but you do want it to stretch you a little bit and be something that does cause you to level up, as we say. CLE, the E is your end game. And so the end game is like, looking at what are you trying to accomplish, being more specific. So instead of saying, I want to lose weight, how much weight do you want to lose? Like setting very, towards the end of the goal, you get into measuring, but you want to be very clear on what your end goal is. And then the A is all about accountability. This one for me, I have found makes a huge difference in goal setting. There's tons of tests that have been done and research studies that have been done that just show by having someone that you check in with frequently on your goal, it increases your odds of attaining your goal by somewhere between like 40 and 60%. So that's a pretty substantial, measurement when you look at goal setting. By just having someone that you're checking in frequently, that accountability makes such a difference. So that might be an actual person, that might be some sort of, weekly system that you do with yourself, where you check in at the end of the week and say, hey, this is what I did. And you have to have a stronger level of self accountability. But thinking about that accountability it makes such a difference. And then the last piece is, of course, the results. And so that's really going back to that end game. How am I measuring my results? So I've been specific about, okay, I want to lose weight, not just I want to lose weight, but I want to lose, let's just say 20 pounds by the end of, August. Now, how am I measuring those results? So, am I looking at the scale? Am I looking at how I feel? Am I looking at the way that my clothes are fitting? So really thinking about measuring the results is the last part of the process. And when you go through this 5-step process, that's like part one. I walk you through that 5-step process. The next piece of this is then looking at 7 different domains and how is this goal going to impact these domains? And so it's like financial, it's family, it's relationships, it's communications. once you go through this very thorough goal setting process, you have a pretty solid goal. You're clear on, why you want to attain or achieve this goal. You know what you're working on. You have a process for checking in on this goal. So it's not something that you set and forget, but because of accountability, you're checking in with someone or your system often. And so I've been doing this for myself, and it's made such a difference. I've been incorporating it into my business, working with my business partners, and it's made such a difference. And so it's something that I've created that I've started sharing out with the world. And I think that, again, I've used SMART goals before. I think that they're great. I just think that for me, this goes a little bit deeper into the goal setting process and helping you to really identify, why is this goal important? Why is this meaningful? So that you actually are motivated to stick to achieving or attaining that goal.
Well, and how does that work? Years ago, you have The Secret coming out, and you have people doing their vision boards and affirmations and so forth. And it's interesting, as I've talked to some people that were part of that movement, they ultimately have said to me, you know what, it doesn't work quite that easy. And how do you relate that for all the people that are doing affirmations, that have those vision boards, all of those things? How does CLEAR relate to actually achieving and experiencing those dreams and goals that you're looking for?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I've found is that so going back to that accountability piece, it's that constantly checking in and being able to measure, how am I doing with this goal? So for me, what that looks like on a frequent basis is I'm someone who operates oftentimes I operate using the 12-week year structure. And so at the end of every week, thinking about the 12-week year structure, I've already identified the 3 goals that I want to focus on for this next quarter, right? That's the premise of the 12-week year. So once I have my 3 goals, I take each goal and I walk it through that CLEAR goals framework. And so now I've gone through the process of, why is this goal important to me? What is the end game here that I'm trying to achieve? How am I checking in with myself and holding myself accountable? Or if there's some external person, who is that person and what does that look like? And then the next part of that is on a weekly basis, actually coming back and checking in on that goal. So for me, I found that CLEAR goals works really well with the 12-week year framework, because every week you're checking in and you're assessing how you've done. But manifestation is really all about setting goals and then taking action, right? We come up with very woo-woo ways of thinking about it. And what does the Bible say? Faith without works is dead. And so it's yes, you can put something out into the universe that you desire, but there has to be movement, there has to be action. And for me, I have found that CLEAR goals just makes that action part really, really clear, right? It makes setting the goal really clear. It makes me understanding what I need to do on a weekly basis really clear. And because I'm checking in with that goal so frequently, it's not something that I'm forgetting about. It's always, every week I'm coming back to this. I'm measuring how I've done, or I'm measuring how I'm moving the needle. And so it makes the process of what some might say, manifestation easier, because I've set a goal, but now I'm taking action for this thing to happen and for the universe to meet me halfway, if you will.
Okay, so I've been setting some goals, all right, over the next number of months. And I'll tell you the stress that I feel about worrying about, am I going to achieve that? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? So how do I deal with the stress? How do I deal with the stress that occurs while I'm trying to achieve all of these goals?
I think that's such a beautiful question, Dr. Doug. And I think that would go back to what we were talking about earlier with really the somatic practices, and having practices that you can incorporate. Maybe I would say, so for me, I believe in daily practices. Now, for some people, maybe they're thinking that's too much. Start with where you can and then build up. But if you think about it, we go through stressful situations. We incur stressors on a daily basis. Now, the extent of those stressors might look different from day to day. So maybe today I'm just stuck in traffic. Maybe tomorrow it's my children, doing something that causes me to be stressed out. Maybe the next day it's business and finances. We're in a political situation for some folks that can be stressful. So we're dealing with lots of stress on a daily basis. And so in the ideal world, we are doing something for ourselves every single day to help to work through and release some of that stress. Now, that might look different from day to day based on your schedule. So maybe today all I have is 10 minutes and I'll take some deep breaths or do some meditation and mindfulness. And that's my practice. That's the practice that nourishes me for the day. I heard you saying that you like walking meditation, like maybe you can, you squeeze that in. I always educate or always encourage clients to get creative about what that looks like, but see if you can find a few minutes in your day, a pocket of pause, if you will, in your day every day for for working through the stress. What oftentimes happens, to answer your question, is that when we don't practice focusing on somatic practices or things to release stress consistently, that stress builds up. So then it becomes really hard to focus, to be productive, to achieve our goals, because we're dealing with an elevated stress level. And so my biggest thing is thinking about it as a proactive versus reactive process, right? So instead of, okay, now I'm feeling really stressed, what do I need to do? How can I do 5 minutes every day of something that helps to just bring down the stress levels? And that again makes it easier to be productive and to be focused.
Cool. And you talk a lot about the brain, the body, the soul.
Mm-hmm.
How do people, because I believe that, as we're making decisions, and you talk about making decisions from the heart, it's really the intuition, that type of thing.
Yeah.
How do we get to the point, and you mentioned mindfulness, how do we get to the point where we literally are experiencing that inner peace, that inner divinity of the soul that so often we just have no clue about?
I love this question so much. And what's coming to me as I was listening to you was that's where the stillness becomes so important. And so again, movement is about moving the body, doing things for the body to help to release the stress, right? Stillness is about pausing, finding time in your day to pause so that you can connect with yourself. We're such simple beings, and I think a lot of times we overcomplicate things. So it's like, well, what do I need to do? You can just sit, or you can just, go, like you said, go for a walk in nature without your phone distracting you and without scrolling social media. When we make time for stillness, whether we're trying to heal our bodies and release stress and trauma, or whether we're trying to, deepen our connection with our intuition or, our higher self, our soul, when we just make the time, the process happens organically. The problem is that we're busy, we're moving, we don't often pause long enough for spirit or for, our ancestors, our guides to be able to get through and communicate to us. So it's not a ton of like, what do I need to do as far as some sort of thing, It's really just about how can I maybe find 5 or 10 minutes to sit still, to take some deep breaths, to clear my mind, because breath work is really helpful for clearing the mind, so that now that all the noise isn't there, things are quiet enough where I can hear from and connect with my soul. The last thing I'll say here is that we are all very used to operating from a very ego state. And the ego is that very loud voice in our heads that, it's all those mix of emotions, but oftentimes it's the fear and it's the unworthiness and it's all of these, the self-doubt. And that voice is very loud. I have found that for so many of us, we miss the guidance of our soul, or what you might call the intuition, because it's almost like a quiet whisper. And if your day to day is your schedule's packed, there's no time to be still, you're constantly moving, there's always thoughts in your head, you're always thinking about tomorrow or yesterday, there's no time for that intuitive voice to come through because there's so much happening. And so again, mind and body are connected. When we slow the body down, when we take those deep breaths to calm the nervous system, the mind calms down, the body calms down, and now you could have a deeper connection with your intuition or your soul.
And oftentimes it's a battle, isn't it, between the soul
yes.
and the ego. And,
yes.
It's fascinating. I know Eckhart Tolle wrote the book that I read, at least, The New Earth, and he talks about ego, and Buddha talks about suffering. And he talks about how the whole point of life is to get to the point where we are not experiencing that suffering, but it goes to the ego, doesn't it? Because it's the ego that wants this, that wants that. It wants us to be important in life, among our neighbors, among our family, among our friends. Yeah. How do you help people to minimize the ego and emphasize the soul?
Yeah. So I'm human, right? And so it's a
We all
journey
are.
that it's a journey that we're all working through together, because there are days where I'm like, man, I got this. And then there are days where I feel like my ego comes in and there's so much self-doubt just because the vision is so big, right? That I'm trying to manifest and create, that I get overwhelmed and I'm like, I have no idea if I can do this. But I would say that, again, going back to, and I continue to say this because it's been so true in my life, going back to the basics. So going back to, holding space for meditation, holding space for breath work, really being consistent about those sorts of mindfulness practices are what really help the ego. So meditation is really about becoming familiar with yourself. Dr. Joe Dispenza describes it that way. And I remember hearing that for the first time, and it really resonated with me. And so I've taken that and held on to that. So meditation, again, is about becoming familiar with self. And what that means is, when we are asleep or on autopilot, the ego is driving the car. So it's making all the decisions. Again, we're kind of, functioning out of habit, and we're just going through life using and doing the habits that we've been doing for years, for decades, whether that's, how we respond and the way that we're reactive to things, or the choices that we make. And, going back to struggling with my weight for so long, I was just in a habit of overeating because that's how I knew to cope with my emotions. There was no level of awareness about my actions. It was just like, I get stressed and then now I'm triggered and this is the way that I respond. What I have found is that through meditation and mindfulness, it almost like puts, I would say, like a buffer between the thought and the action. So for me, and for a lot of other people, it's like, I no longer just have the thought and think I have to respond. I have the thought, and then I take a second to just observe the thought. And then I get to make a decision about responding from a higher mind or a higher self versus just the habit or the reactive place that I'm used to responding from. Now, again, it's a process where some days we get it right and we do a really good job, and some days we don't, and then you try again. Just a real life example for me, like when you think about like what's a goal or something that you're working on. I have 2 young children, and right now it's just me, and so I'm not a single mother in the sense that they don't have their father, but when they're with me, I'm a single mama, and it's just me and my girls. And so there are days where I don't get a break, and I might be trying to, balance life and business and all the things. And then I also have to be a mom. And sometimes that can be a lot. And so I will say, okay, I want to show up today and be peaceful and calm. And then something happens, right? And things go left. And that goal, that plan gets thrown completely out of the window. But on the really good days, mindfulness has helped me to get to a space where something happens, stressor or trigger happens, and I have just a split second to be like, I can yell, or like, I'm going to yell and respond to this, or I'm going to just take a deep breath. And it's in taking that deep breath that I can just catch myself before I respond or react in a way that doesn't feel good and go through all the emotions that come with that. So I hope that answers your question. I found that meditation just gives you a bit of a buffer to become aware of the thoughts and not just automatically respond to the thoughts and the habits that we oftentimes respond from.
So true. So true. So you've written a book, Hold Space to Heal. Can you share very quickly with the audience what's that about, or does it include everything we've been talking about today?
I think our conversation has done a really great job of summing up a lot of the book. So the book is called Hold Space to Heal, and it offers 7 somatic practices that, again, so talking about what we talked about today, that you can use to release, reconnect, and remember. And what I mean by release, reconnect, and remember, I have found that healing is a process, right? Like, evolving into your highest self is a process. So the first step is the releasing process. So we talked about at the top of the episode, that's the process of being willing to go back, to look at all the things that happened to you, to explore those things, and then to make a decision that this no longer has to be my story. I don't have to be stuck in this, and I can release this. The next part of the process is the reconnection process. And we've also talked about that. That is reconnection with source, or however you define your higher power. There's something higher out here that is, generating the energy, for the planet and us having this human experience. So however you want to title that. But there's also reconnection with our bodies. Oftentimes when we've experienced trauma, we disconnect from our bodies, and you have to reconnect with the body. You have to, get to know the body, as who you are today. And then that last part of reconnection, I think we've also talked about, is really reconnecting with the intuition, right? So you start to reconnect with all these aspects of yourself. And then the third part of the process is the remembering. And what I mean by that is that's really an ongoing process, the remembering. So you're doing that, I'm doing that. It's remembering our power. I think that, as spiritual beings having this human existence, we are born and we forget really at the core who we are. And then life is about helping us to remember, so we can go through these obstacles and choose to see them as a part of our soul's journey to remembering our mission, our journey, and what we said yes to before we came here. And that's ongoing, right? Like that's not like an end date. It's not you reach a certain level and now I'm done, I remember. That's a constant process. But when you allow yourself to remember your power, to remember your purpose, to remember your soul's unique blueprint, I think that's when we are the most aligned to who we desire to be before we came here. And that's when we can show up in the world that makes impact and helps others to go through that same process.
True. All right. So as we come to a close, what would be a short message that you'd like to share with the audience?
I believe that we all have the ability to really take charge of our healing journey. I think we give so much of our power away to external sources. So whether that's a therapist or a doctor, I think that professionals are helpful for us, but I think that so many of us are missing the mark on really doing the work for ourselves by holding space to heal, as we talked about today. And so I just want to encourage people to take their power back. You can work with a professional, whether it's a doctor or a therapist, in your healing journey, but be empowered to know that you have so much of an ability to heal yourself by moving the body, by getting still and holding space for those, unresolved emotions to come up and to be released. So I just want to remind people of the power that we have, and to help people, to hopefully have people feel empowered to really start taking their power back by doing some of that work themselves.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Well, Dominiece, this has been incredible. I wish
you.
we had more time.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Doug. I've enjoyed this conversation.
I really appreciate it. And folks, thanks for listening. I hope you really enjoyed this and look forward to having you join us again soon. This is Dr. Doug saying namaste.